So I've been in Dalian for a while now for field work and for research, and I've been walking the streets taking photographs, and I thought it would be an interesting opportunity to share with you some ideas about photography and photo ethics, because certain things have come up as I've been doing my field work, and I think it's probably worth making a short film related to that. So to give you a bit of background, I have an undergrad and a postgrad, a bachelor's, a BA honours and an MA in photography, and I've worked in Japan as a professional photographer and an artist, and I've had numerous one-man shows. I worked as a professional photographer, fashion photographer, music photographer, and other kinds of commercial work, and but as it is now, I'm an academic, and so I approach my photography, I guess, from a certain academic perspective. And you might say that the academic perspective kind of undergirds my practice. And what I mean really by that is that whatever I do, I kind of always imagine that if I was to do that and submit that for university ethics clearance, would it be accepted or not? And of course, if it wouldn't be accepted, then I wouldn't do that. So I kind of have this kind of like university ethics rector or someone sitting on my shoulder going, not sure about that. So basically, I'm always governed by this internal mechanism about whether or not whatever I do would be acceptable, you know, to university ethics procedures and practices. And that really governs, you know, the way that I conduct my field work, my research, and my photography. That's like the, you know, the underpinning, if you like. However, and this is a big however, there are certain caveats to this blanket idea of ethics. You know, I mean, ethics is always a malleable concept. I mean, you know, certain standards, you know, remain intact, is that you don't exploit people, you know, you don't exploit the vulnerable, the elderly, children or whatever. You know, there's always got to be some sense of checks and balances. And also in amongst that, you've got certain legal things. So I just wanted to outline a couple of these points, because there's certain things that have come up recently, not for me here, but globally, that I think people really should be aware of. So anyone who does street photography, anyone who does documentary photography, in fact really anyone who does any kind of photography, has to understand the law. That's the first thing. Now, I did undergraduate studies and postgraduate studies, and never once was the law taught to us, which is kind of utterly bizarre. Even copyright law wasn't taught. So I'm not sure why that was omitted from the syllabus or the curriculum, but it was, and it's kind of weird. So the first thing that anyone who conducts, I guess, any kind of activity in the public sphere has to understand is how they are interacting with space, and how that interaction with space is perceived by law. So, like I said, there's been a couple of incidents recently in the news which I feel obliged to throw my two penneth worth in. And the first thing that you have to understand is there is a distinction in law. These are general rules, by the way. There is a distinction in law between private space and public space. Of course, everyone knows that, but do they really know that? I don't know. Apparently not. So, in a public arena, you have no right to your image. If you're walking down the street and someone photographs you, that is their right to photograph them. You may not like it, and they probably shouldn't do it, and they should ask your opinion, your permission. But actually, if you're walking down the street, like the street that I'm walking down now, and you photograph something, you have a right to photograph whatever you see on the street. Now, if you're photographing through people's windows, that becomes a different point. But essentially, in the public domain, you do not have a right to your image. Second point is that in the private domain, you also technically do not have a right to your image, and this is what came up in the news recently. However, the owner of the private domain has a right to your image, insofar as the owner of the private domain has the right to distinguish who can and cannot take photographs within their space. All right, so if you're in a restaurant, for example, technically you have no right to photograph in a restaurant unless you get permission from the restaurant owner who owns the space. So it's a bit of a grey area, but it's quite, I think, quite well understood by photographers, or should be well understood by photographers. So what happened in the news recently was there was a performer playing, I believe, in St. Pancras Station, and he was playing the piano, and some people objected to them recording. These people objected to the recording of their image, and there was this huge outcry, this moral outcry on YouTube, because it just so happens these people happen to be Chinese, by the way. So no xenophobia there at all, no. So anyway, the people objected to the filming of their image, and all these half-wits, all these armchair experts were going, oh well, you know, they've no right to that. He's a right to take filming there. Well, actually, he did not. If it was St. Pancras Station, as I understand, St. Pancras Station is owned by what used to be British Rail, BR. It's not a public space. So actually, if the pianist had wished to record in that space, then what he should have done is sought permission from the owners of the space, for example, the former British Rail. Now, he may have done that. I don't know the backstory. He may have done that. But anyway, he had to do that. He had no right to operate a camera to record people's images without seeking permission of the owner of the space. Now, even had he done that, let's assume that he had done that and he understood the rules and the law, and he wanted to video himself playing piano in St. Pancras Station. That's fair enough. But what he has to do morally, again, in order to get this passed by an ethics committee, what he should have done morally and probably quasi-legally is he should have put a notice to tell people that within the demarked space, and he should have demarked that space with a clear line. For example, put some yellow don't go tape around where he was filming. He should have positioned his cameras to record within a given space and put a sign to tell people that if you enter the space, you're forfeiting the right, or you agree to be filmed. Now, if he didn't do that, those tourists who took offense by the recording of their image were perfectly within their rights, legally and morally, to complain about that. So the uproar by all these armchair experts is just completely unfounded and unjust, and actually just nothing more than xenophobia, actually. So that's the first thing. So it used to be the case that when you entered a concert hall, I used to do a lot of music photography, when you entered a concert hall, you were not allowed to film in the space. Only those people, for example, like myself, who had permission, who were there for magazines or whatever, were allowed to photograph. And if you took a camera and it was, you know, you were found, it was taken away, and you were given a ticket number, and you'd get it returned when you left. You weren't allowed to photograph inside arenas and concert halls. That's now changed a lot. So that's hopefully put that into some context. I won't go too deep into this one. I just really wanted to touch upon a few points. So we're governed by ethics, but there is a point whereby you have to take the photograph. So the reason I started filming this, well, where I started it, which is back a few hundred meters, was because I'm photographing a door, and a woman is standing there, and she's not giving me any grief. She's really not. She's just standing there, but there's a certain passive aggressiveness maybe to her demeanor, maybe I'm misreading her incorrectly, but it felt to me that there was a certain passive aggressiveness. Why are you photographing my door? And I've had that a lot as I've been doing my research and my field work, because I've been walking around a lot of quite impoverished areas, and a lot of people, you know, they look at me a bit strange because I'm a Westerner with long hair taking photographs. But oftentimes people, you know, I smile at them and say hello, and most of the time, you know, 98% of the time people are fine. A couple of times people have been a bit testy with me, and you know, I'm guessing, I don't speak Mandarin, so I'm guessing what they said, but they seem to be intimating that I shouldn't be taking photographs. Well, you know, we try to be polite, but they can sod off basically, you know. So I do, as I go around these areas, I am mindful not to cause any harm, and I'm mindful not to touch anything, and I'm mindful never to go into people's door, you know, into property, to cross over the threshold between private space and public, between public space and private space. I'm almost, you know, I'm always mindful of not trespassing, not putting my camera down anywhere. I don't carry a camera bag, so I don't have to deal with that. But not touching anything, not bending anything or stepping on anything. I'm always mindful about that, because then somebody could come back to you for criminal damage. You know, things like this. So you're always mindful of that, and I'm always mindful and respectful that people do live where I'm photographing. I'm, you know, careful about that. But what the point I really want to make is that there has to come a point where you just have to say, sod it. If I just didn't, you know, if you don't like me taking a photograph, well then I'm sorry about that, you know, because I need to take a photograph for the project I'm working on. I want to take a photograph for the project I'm working on, and if I can't, if I am so sensitive that I'm feeling this person's, you know, discomfort because I'm photographing their doorway, well then, yeah, I'll never take a photograph. And then Don McCullum would never have taken, you know, his war photographs, and so on and so forth. We wouldn't take photographs if we, you know, if we allowed ourselves to be pressured by this kind of passive aggressiveness. So it's a kind of hard, you know, line to distinguish sometimes between wanting to be compassionate to people and wanting to be, you know, respectful of people's areas, and at the same time just wanting them to, you know, tell them to sod off, because I want to do the photography that I want to do, because if I don't do it, it won't be done, you know. So yeah, you know, it's interesting that we are in this area of complication, shall we say. So I think the best thing to say is, when you approach photography, approach it with, you know, street photography, documentary photography. When you approach photography, approach it with care and with caution and with kindness to your subjects, and, you know, try to have some understanding of ethics and some understanding of the legal parameters. And again, back to the legal point, if you don't know the law, then don't take my word for it. If you don't know the law, if you don't know the law, then, you know, really ask. Don't go online and don't read forums and don't listen to people who know all these other experts. Actually, when you hit a country, check what the law is, and check what you are allowed to photograph and what you are not allowed to photograph, and you know, work from there. And that will at least give you some standpoint of what the legal framework is. But in terms of the moral framework, I think just have in your mind, you know, the idea of do no harm, you know, be respectful, be empathic, be you know, compassionate, but at the same time take the photographs you want to take, as long as they don't infringe on people's civil or human or legal rights, you know. Because I think oftentimes we can feel you know, pressured, this kind of passive aggressiveness, street photographers, you know, by thinking, oh well, I shouldn't be taking that photograph, or people don't want me to take it. Well, don't try and second guess. That's another thing. Just ignore people's second guesses. And one last point to make is, if someone shouts at you, ignore them. Are they shouting at you? I don't know. They could be shouting at someone else. If someone physically comes over and says, "Oi, don't photograph that," well, then you can either get into a discussion or an argument, or you can just say okay and walk away. You know, you have your own choice how you would deal with that situation. But what I hate is, for example, if I'm photographing, you know, somewhere like the doorway, for example, I'm not in the person's property, I'm on the street, I'm allowed to photograph there, and somebody's like, you know, whistles or shouts, I just ignore them, because if they want to come over and ask me what I'm doing or why am I doing it, or whatever, then that's their prerogative. But I'm not a dog, and I'm not going to be at someone's beck and call simply because they're too lazy to come over and actually get into a discussion or a confrontation. So yeah, just ignore people who shout at you, ignore people who whistle at you, ignore people who make snide comments or whatever, and just get on and do your work. I mean, photography is work, right? It's a grind. You've got to do it, otherwise nobody will do it. And you've got to get out there. If you're into street photography, documentary photography, you've just got to get out there and take the photographs you want to take, because people only have those types of photography or have those types of photos because people went out there and did it, and people went out there and took those photos. If you don't get out there and do it, if someone doesn't get out there and do it, there won't be any of those types of photos. So that's the only thing I would say. Be mindful, be respectful, know the bounds of the law, but at the same time, take the photos you want to take.